The Alpha King's Forbidden Love. Cedric stood at the edge of the high stone balcony, his gaze lost in the moonlit distance where the forest formed an endless sea of shadow. The wind teased strands of his dark hair across his forehead, but he did not brush them away. A hollow ache lingered in his chest, a constant reminder that he had once tasted a rare and profound happiness. That happiness was shattered in an instant, leaving him haunted and embittered. The loss of his Luna had been swift, brutal, and absolute. Since then, sleepless nights were his constant companion. Each evening, he roamed the corridors of his fortress-like estate, half searching for answers he did not truly wish to find, half convinced that life held nothing beyond cold duty and faint echoes of memory. A restless hush had settled over his pack, for their Alpha King had grown distant. In the months following his mate's death, Cedric had made decisions that perplexed even his closest allies, and among those perplexing habits was his increasing inclination to visit human slave auctions. Though his beta and other confidants found this behavior unsettling, they did not dare question him. Cedric's temper had grown dangerously unpredictable, and they feared his wrath more than ever. In truth, Cedric himself could not articulate why he went, only that some persistent itch in his mind demanded he scour each filthy auction house, some hidden compulsion driving him onward. Perhaps he believed he might sense a spark of the beloved presence he had lost, or perhaps he sought a bitterness so raw it would reflect his own emotional torment. On a humid evening when the moon hung large and pale, he arrived at a dimly lit warehouse where men traded souls for coin. The heavy doors slammed shut behind him. A scattered crowd, most reeking of sweat and brutality, pressed forward. Cedric's height and bearing made space around him as soon as he entered. The stench of fear and despair clung to every corner. He surveyed the makeshift platform at the center of the room, eyes narrowed, a subtle snarl curling his lips. He had encountered many unsavory scenes, but this one felt particularly grim. Chains clanked as figures shuffled across the platform. Many appeared ragged, malnourished, trembling in a silent plea for mercy that would not come. Cedric crossed his arms over his broad chest and watched without emotion as the first few slaves were auctioned. Men called out bids in loud, harsh tones, some fueled by twisted desires, others purely in it for profit. He could smell terror emanating from the captives. His wolf side found the fear distasteful, but a faint restlessness whispered along his nerves. He wondered if once again he would leave empty-handed, his strange compulsion sated only by the knowledge that he tried night after night to fill a void that was never filled. A hush rolled through the audience as a new figure was dragged onto the makeshift stage. A young woman, shackled at the wrists, her clothing torn, bruises marking her skin, hair tangled with dirt. Cedric felt a slight prickle of attention. He almost dismissed her as no different from the others. Then, the tilt of her chin caught his eye. She would have looked pathetic, yet her posture conveyed a slender thread of defiance. Her hair, though matted, was an arresting shade of white blonde. When she dared to look up from the grime, Cedric discovered that her eyes were a striking gray, almost silvery in the dim lighting, like a shard of moonlight piercing through a clouded night sky. And then there was the scent. Beneath the stench of fear, sweat, and filth, something alluring coiled through the air, tangling with his senses. The auctioneer prodded her, spitting humiliating remarks. Cedric heard more than saw the men around him shift with unsettling interest. They hurled lewd jeers. The young woman flinched at some of the words but did not lower her gaze. Her chin rose a fraction higher, lips pressed in a thin, determined line. Cedric could feel the tension in the crowd. This was a girl who was not yet broken, and in an environment like this, that was a rarity. He felt a flare of unexpected anger at the men leering at her as if she were some spectacle to be devoured. Abruptly, he pushed forward, ignoring the startled looks of those he brushed aside. The bidding began at a pittance. The auctioneer rattled off a cheap price, clearly believing her battered state meant she was worth little. Several voices immediately chipped in higher sums, some adding crude commentary about how they would discipline her. Cedric's wolf snarled in the back of his mind. He could sense his own tension mounting, that possessive swirl he had not felt since losing his mate. His voice rang out, crisp, cutting through the noise. The sum he called was triple the highest bid so far. Surprise rippled through the crowd, but a handful of determined participants did not yield. Someone else called a sum nearly as high, boasting about training her. Cedric's gaze flicked to the man's smirking face, and for a moment the glow of his werewolf eyes sparked in the dim environment. The man's skin went pale, and he immediately quieted. The others, realizing they were pitted against the formidable Alpha King, fell silent. Cedric strode forward, holding the auctioneer's gaze. The older man stammered out a final call for more bids, but none came. Cedric moved with lethal grace, stepping onto the platform without waiting for permission. The chain connecting the young woman's wrists rattled, and the men holding her scurried back. The subtle smirk of triumph on her face surprised him. For a moment she seemed almost proud that no one else dared challenge the silent, dangerous man standing beside her. When Cedric tore away the chain, the metal snapped under his strength, and she swayed slightly but did not crumple. He could smell the blood crusted in her hair, the dirt on her skin, and still that elusive something else beneath it all. "Come," he commanded, the single word cold. She hesitated. Her eyes flickered with confusion and anger, and she remained planted in place despite her battered state. Another wave of admiration, unwanted and abrupt, coursed through him. He curled his fingers around her arm, not gently but not with the full harshness he was known for. She tried to twist away. The faintest growl escaped his lips, and she halted. Beneath the dirt her cheeks flushed and her eyes widened. Maybe she did not know precisely what he was, but she recognized raw danger. Still, she managed a glare. With a final look of defiance, she spat in the direction of the departing guards. Cedric tightened his hold just enough to let her know that crossing him would be far riskier. He escorted her outside, ignoring the curious onlookers and the few who whispered rumors. It did not take long for a car to arrive, driven by one of Cedric's pack members who had accompanied him. The young woman was ushered into the back seat beside Cedric. She tried once to push away, her bound wrists making her clumsy, but he caught her easily, pressing her back against the seat. A low snarl from deep in his throat silenced her next protest. He could sense fear and defiance mingling in her scent. Neither spoke during the long ride home. When the vehicle finally pulled up to Cedric's estate, the massive iron gates groaned open. The building loomed like a dark fortress, lit only by scattered lanterns. Tall stone walls, thick wooden doors, corridors echoing with the hush of power and the secrets of an ancient werewolf lineage. Cedric propelled her inside, ignoring the raised eyebrows of the staff and the curious stares of several pack members who silently stepped aside. She tried to process her surroundings, eyes darting from hallway to hallway, from the tapestries along the walls to the flicker of candlelight. Panic and anger warred for control on her face. She stumbled once, and Cedric's grip shifted from her upper arm to the back of her neck, an unmistakably possessive gesture that made her stiffen in indignation. At last he guided her into a small windowless room. There was a cot, a single blanket, and a heavy door of solid oak. He released her with a gentle shove that sent her stumbling forward. She spun around on shaky legs, shooting him a furious glare. For a moment, words formed on her lips. She seemed ready to speak, perhaps to hurl an insult, but something in his cold, golden-brown gaze made her swallow it back. "You belong to me now," he said in a quiet, predatory voice. "If you want to survive, you will learn to obey." He expected her to cower or at least avert her eyes. Instead, she locked gazes with him, trembling but unyielding. Heat rippled through him, a surprising echo of something primal. He almost growled, torn between anger at her insolence and grudging admiration. He turned sharply on his heel and locked the door behind him. The beta, a wolf named Lucan, stood waiting in the corridor. He had steel-gray hair and a sharp, observant glint in his eyes. He bowed his head slightly. "You must be tired, Alpha," Lucan murmured. Do you want me to make arrangements for her? Cedric's reply was a curt shake of the head. I'll decide that later, he said. Lucan watched him with a mix of curiosity and concern, but said nothing further as Cedric strode away. Cedric's private quarters lay up a winding stone staircase. He slammed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment with closed eyes. His mind was chaos. He recalled the look on the young woman's face, a stubborn mixture of fear and resistance. Something about her spirit reminded him of, but he refused to allow that memory to surface. Instead, he stripped off his jacket and tossed it aside, ignoring the pang in his chest. Even so, her scent clung to his senses, a faint yet potent aroma that both comforted and unsettled him. He could not rid himself of the question. Why had he purchased her so impulsively? Sleep did not come easily. The nightmares of his lost Luna returned, but this time, fleeting images of a defiant, gray-eyed captive intruded, tangling up his usual torment with something different, something equally disturbing. When dawn arrived, Cedric left his chambers on too little rest. He directed a pack soldier to deliver some necessities to the captive, then made his way outside. Training grounds spread out before the estate, where several young wolves sparred under a watchful instructor's eye. Cedric walked among them silently, measuring their techniques. A few paused in deference, but he gestured them to continue. He crossed to a corner where Lucan was conferring with a tall, wiry she-wolf named Mira, the lead trainer. They acknowledged Cedric with respectful nods. "Any news from the northern pack?" Cedric asked in a low voice, almost monotone. Lucan shook his head. "Nothing that suggests hostility, but they've been quiet lately." Cedric grunted, his mind drifting back to the presence locked in a small room within his fortress. "Double patrols near the borders. We can't afford complacency." He scanned the field. "And ensure the new recruits are prepared." Lucan hesitated. "Alpha, about the girl you brought back?" He paused, measuring Cedric's reaction. "What do you plan to do with her?" Cedric's jaw tightened. "She's mine," he said simply, as though that ended the matter. Yet there was a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. Lucan respected Cedric's privacy enough not to press the point. He only nodded, stepping away to fulfill the order. Cedric left the training grounds and ventured back inside. The quiet corridors felt oddly suffocating. He made his way to the small, windowless room. The key turned in the lock with a grinding click, and he pushed the door open. Sarah stood in the center, wrists still bearing faint bruises from the manacles. She stared at him. For a moment, neither spoke. He noted that someone had left water and a bit of bread on a tray, though she seemed reluctant to consume it. She appeared exhausted, and there were new welts on her arms that he did not recall from the previous night. Cedric frowned, uncertain whether she had done that to herself, or it was the result of a scuffle with a guard. She did not flinch under his scrutiny. "I suggest you eat," he said. "You'll need your strength." He noticed the dryness of his own voice. Sarah did not move toward the tray. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. Despite her obvious fear, she forced herself to speak. He met her gaze, taking in the steely resolve in her eyes. "Because a lifeless captive is useless," he said bluntly. The callousness of his own statement irked him, but it was a convenient shield for feelings he preferred not to examine. "Don't question me again." Her lips parted and anger sparked in her eyes, but she forced herself to remain silent. She gave a slight nod and, with slow, deliberate movements, lifted the small piece of bread to her mouth. Cedric watched her for another moment, ensuring she obeyed before stepping forward. She tensed as he raised a hand, but he only reached for her arm to inspect the bruises. For a heartbeat, she seemed stunned by the unexpected gesture, but when his grip tightened, she winced, fury flashing in her eyes again. He realized with a flicker of annoyance that he was behaving in a contradictory manner, ordering her to obey, while also examining her injuries with a faint semblance of concern. "You will remain here under guard until I decide otherwise," he said. "If you test me, you will regret it. Do you understand? She swallowed whatever retort she had wanted to spit at him and gave a small nod. Satisfied, Cedric let go of her and turned to leave, locking the door behind him. He tried to ignore the uneasy sensation stirring in his chest. Days slipped by in a strained rhythm. Sarah's spirit refused to break. Though she did not speak often, the look in her eyes whenever Cedric appeared was stubborn, unyielding. He hated how part of him admired her tenacity. He had not brought her clothing beyond the simplest garments, but she made do, washing her face and arms with the small basin of water. Each day, Cedric or one of his subordinates checked on her. He insisted she receive minimal but sufficient nourishment, if only to keep her alive and conscious. Perhaps he was waiting for her to submit completely, but the longer she held out, the more she seemed to fan embers of grudging respect within him. On one occasion, Cedric stood outside the door listening. Inside, he could hear her muttering. She paced, likely cursing her situation. Something about the tone of her words made him linger. He wondered about her life before. She bore bruises that suggested a harsh existence well before the auction. He recalled the faint silver spark in her eyes and the unusual aroma in her scent. He had tried to dismiss that detail, but it kept nagging at him. No ordinary human smelled like that. Tired of his own indecision, he called for the healer of the pack, a middle-aged woman named Eveline. She was no werewolf, but she had served the pack for years, adept at tending wounds and keeping secrets. He guided her to Sarah's room, ignoring the surprise on Eveline's face as he commanded her to assess the captive. Once inside, Eveline's gentle approach made Sarah flinch at first, but the healer's kind expression gradually eased the girl's tension. Cedric hovered near the doorway, arms folded, carefully observing. He watched the healer's careful hands graze the bruises, press lightly on old scars, and check for fever or infection. Eveline offered Sarah soft, comforting words in a low voice. Sarah remained guarded, but her shoulders relaxed by a fraction. When Eveline finished, she stepped away and addressed Cedric in a hushed tone. "She's weaker than she lets on," she said, "but she'll recover. Nothing is too severe. Some injuries are older, some new. She should rest more, and you might consider letting her out of this small space to move her limbs. She'll heal faster with proper nourishment, fresh air, and some measure of kindness." Cedric's jaw tensed. He mulled over the advice, but pride in his own pain made him resist the notion of offering gentleness. Still, he gave a curt nod and dismissed Eveline. Before he left, he met Sarah's gaze. Though his expression was steeled, he saw the faintest flicker of curiosity cross her face. She seemed unsure why he cared enough to have a healer examine her at all. A week dragged into 2. Cedric's daily routine continued. He oversaw pack matters, scanned the horizon for threats, and tried to ignore the hollow place inside him. Yet now, he had an additional fixation: Sarah. Each time he checked on her, he felt the tension swirl. She defied him openly only on occasion, but there was a subtle war in the way she refused to cower. More than once, Cedric caught himself remembering the warmth of her skin when he grasped her arm, or the faint, shimmering silver of her eyes when she glared. The memory unsettled him so deeply that he took to avoiding her for stretches of time. Instead, he sent Lucan or another subordinate to deliver messages, food, or instructions. However, the restlessness in his gut did not subside. Finally, he could take it no longer. Late one night, Cedric found himself walking through the corridors toward that familiar door. Lucan was posted nearby. The beta's eyebrows lifted in mild surprise at Cedric's appearance. "I can wait elsewhere if you like," Lucan offered. Cedric shook his head and signaled for him to open the door. Inside, he found Sarah curled on the cot, arms hugging her knees. She scrambled to a wary seated position when she noticed him. Soft candlelight cast shadows across her face, highlighting new bruises that had turned faintly yellowish as they healed. Her expression was guarded, but he could see the gleam of strong will behind her exhaustion. "You haven't tried to escape lately," Cedric remarked in a low voice. She snorted softly. "Where would I go?" she retorted. I don't even know where I am. And you've got guards everywhere." Her voice was laced with frustration but also resignation. Cedric advanced a step. She tilted her face up to maintain eye contact, refusing to avert her gaze. "What is your name?" he asked. She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance, perhaps surprised he had never asked it properly before. "Serafina," she answered, her tone crisp. "But people usually call me Sarah." Cedric tested the sound of it in his mind. "Sarah," he said quietly. "Your eyes." He caught himself, frowning. "They're unusual." She shrugged. "So I've been told." A strained silence followed as Cedric tried to find the words for the questions that gnawed at him. He did not want to appear weak or uncertain, yet confusion circled in his thoughts. Finally, he settled on a different path. "You disobey me often, but you're still here." He studied her reaction. "You must realize there are worse fates than living under my roof, captive though you may be." Sarah's expression darkened. "I'd rather be free and dead than caged and alive." She bit back. The remark stirred an unexpected pang in Cedric. He knelt suddenly, startling her, so that they were nearly at eye level. His presence radiated raw power and she tensed. "You speak of freedom as if it's a simple thing," he murmured. "But from what I see, you've known little kindness out there, have you?" She did not reply. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned her face slightly away, though not fully. Cedric recognized the pain behind her defiance and resisted the impulse to soften his tone. He stood taking her silence as answer enough. "From now on, you will eat proper meals, and you will be allowed an hour in the courtyard each day. If you attempt to run, you'll regret it." She bristled. "I'm not a dog to be tossed scraps or walked on a leash." Cedric exhaled slowly, ignoring the spark of annoyance. "I'll treat you as I see fit, Sarah," he said. "But if you comply, you might find your stay here less unpleasant." She looked ready to protest further, but wisely bit her tongue. Cedric gave a final nod and left. Lucan locked the door behind him. Word spread quietly among the pack that their Alpha King had purchased a stubborn human slave, keeping her under lock and key. Some wondered if she was to be a mere diversion for him, especially in the wake of his grief, or whether she was destined for a darker purpose. Yet rumors began to percolate among the staff who brought food and water, noticing the bruises on her arms and how quickly they faded after a few days. One guard swore he had found her at night leaning against a wall, still awake and alert, when she should have been exhausted. Another reported that while she was in the courtyard under supervision, she had stared at the moon with an intensity that unnerved him. Cedric dismissed these whispers as exaggerations, at least at first. One morning, Lucan approached Cedric with a serious look. "Alpha," he said quietly, "the men are talking. They say the girl heals faster than expected, and she has an odd scent." Cedric's features remained stony, but inside he felt a tremor of suspicion. "I've noticed," he admitted. Lucan pursed his lips. "Shall I investigate?" Cedric shook his head. "I'll handle it. Keep an eye on her. If she shows any sign of unusual strength or tries to flee, restrain her. But do not harm her unnecessarily." Lucan raised a brow slightly but nodded, stepping away. That evening, Cedric prowled through the corridors, restless with unspoken questions. Eventually, he found himself in the courtyard. The moon was near full, shining bright upon the stone walls and scattering pale light across the trimmed hedges. There he saw Sarah walking under guard, as per his new decree. She wore simple gray attire that had been provided to her. Bruises that once covered her arms had faded to faint traces. She caught sight of him and froze, the guard stepping aside respectfully. Her expression was wary, a mixture of resentment and surprise that he was there. Without a word, he gestured for the guard to leave. Reluctantly, the man obeyed. Sarah stood beneath the moonlight, shoulders rigid, eyes reflecting the silver glow. Cedric approached quietly, watching her for any subtle sign of what he now suspected might lie beneath her human exterior. She swallowed and dropped her gaze to his chest as if debating whether or not to show submission. The corners of Cedric's lips twitched in a humorless half-smile. "I've heard interesting rumors about you," he said. She let out a soft scoff. "I'm sure you have. People love to whisper about the captive." Cedric took a step closer, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. "They say you heal quickly, that you barely tire, and that your scent is unexplainable." Sarah's pulse fluttered at the base of her throat. "Maybe I'm a witch," she said sarcastically. Cedric's eyes narrowed. "Are you?" She actually smiled, a hard, humorless expression. "Do I look like I can cast spells?" she retorted. Cedric's wolf senses picked up the quickening of her heart. He moved in, close enough that she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "What are you?" he asked in a low voice, lacking the usual commanding edge. For a moment she appeared genuinely puzzled. "I'm just a human," she said, though there was uncertainty in her tone, as if she didn't fully believe her own words. A muscle twitched along Cedric's jaw. He could smell the truth in her confusion, but also something underlying that. Perhaps she was ignorant of her own nature. A swirl of possibilities flickered through his mind. He reached out suddenly, gripping her chin, tilting her face upward to the moonlight. She resisted, but his hold was unrelenting. Her eyes flashed with that silver hue, and something deep within Cedric responded instinctively, as if a chord had been struck in his chest. His wolf stirred in the recesses of his consciousness, not with anger, but with an emotion akin to longing. Alarmed, he released her abruptly and stepped back, turning his head aside. Sarah exhaled shakily, trying to hide her rattled nerves, though her heart continued to pound. That night Cedric did not sleep. His mind was besieged by questions about her identity and by an unwanted but insistent connection he felt each time their gazes locked. Memories of his lost mate taunted him, stirring up a caustic brew of guilt and anger. He wanted to reject the possibility that he might feel even a shred of attraction or empathy for someone else, especially a captive who remained defiant. And yet a part of him had begun to wonder if she was more than just a chance purchase at a slave auction. Not long after, everything changed. The first sign was subtle, a suspicious presence lingering at the southern edge of his territory. Scouts reported strange tracks, large footprints that might belong to a hostile werewolf pack. Cedric doubled the border patrol. Tensions rippled among his wolves and training intensified. He became absorbed with these matters, spending less time monitoring Sarah directly, trusting the guards and Lucan to keep her contained. Meanwhile, Sarah found small ways to build her strength. When taken to the courtyard, she did discreet exercises, stretching her limbs, running sprints back and forth under watchful eyes. She ate enough to recover her energy. Though outwardly she maintained a veneer of reluctant compliance, inwardly she still yearned for freedom. On a cloudy afternoon, Sarah formulated a plan. She had noticed that when the guard switched shifts in the courtyard, there was a brief lull. She counted the seconds, memorized routines. With her renewed strength, she guessed she might outrun them, or at least evade them long enough to scale a section of the outer wall. She had tested her physical limits in secret, astonished by how quickly her stamina improved, how her senses seemed sharper. She no longer wrote it off as pure adrenaline. Some nights when she dozed on the cot, she imagined hearing a faint whisper in her mind, like a voice calling to her from a vast distance. She dismissed it as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Still, it comforted her in the darkness, reminding her that there was something more to her that she had yet to unravel. When the moment came, she acted. The guard opened the courtyard gate, ushered her forward, and then turned to speak with the soldier who was set to relieve him. Without warning, Sarah bolted, racing across the stones with startling speed. Shouts erupted behind her. Heart pounding, she leapt over a low barrier, ignoring the jolt of pain through her ankles. She spotted a rough section of the wall ahead, where time had worn the mortar between stones. The barrier was tall, but if she could climb fast enough, maybe she could drop to the other side. She reached it just as a half-dozen guards came thundering around the corner. Teeth gritted, she scrambled upward, ignoring the scrape of stone against her palms. She had nearly reached the top when a hand closed around her ankle, jerking her off balance. She kicked wildly, catching her pursuer on the chin. He yelped in surprise, loosening his grip, and she managed to haul herself up another few inches. Then a second guard seized the waistband of her clothes and yanked her down. She tumbled to the ground with a harsh thud, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Furious, she struggled, but they wrestled her face down. Rough hands pinned her arms behind her back. She bared her teeth, letting out a strangled yell. The guards were about to bind her more securely when a commanding voice sliced through the commotion. "Enough!" Cedric emerged from a side entrance, eyes blazing. Lucan followed close behind, both breathing hard as if they had raced over at top speed. The guards parted, revealing Sarah pinned to the cobblestones. Cedric stepped in, grabbing her arm and hauling her upright. She fought with all her might, adrenaline surging. He tightened his hold until she cried out. Their gazes locked, and an electric tension crackled between them. Beneath the anger, there was a pulse of recognition, something neither of them could properly name. "You foolish girl," Cedric snapped, voice low, thick with rage. "Did you really think you could outrun me? Outrun my entire pack?" Sarah refused to respond. Her chest heaved, hair falling in wild tangles over her eyes. The taste of blood lingered on her split lip. Cedric's menacing presence loomed over her, and she felt an inexplicable surge of heat in her veins, a savage spark of defiance. "I'd rather die trying," she spat. At her words, the wolf within Cedric roared with primal ferocity. He lifted her by the collar of her shirt, forcing her to stand on her toes. "You know nothing of death," he growled, "or of how merciful I've been." She twisted, and something in her posture, the raw desperation, made the hair on the back of Cedric's neck stand on end. A swirl of uncertainty pulsed through him. The guards tensed, suspecting he might punish her violently for her attempted escape. Instead, Cedric abruptly threw her over his shoulder. She let out a muffled protest, fists pounding on his back, but he hardly noticed. With measured strides, he marched back into the building through a maze of corridors until he reached a spare chamber deep in the estate. He kicked the door open, set her down, and locked the door behind them. The space was larger than her previous cell, with a single high window that let in faint daylight. Sarah stumbled, still dizzy from being tossed about. Cedric stalked around her, unstoppable fury emanating from every tense line of his body. She watched him warily, keeping her distance. "You refuse to learn," he snarled. "Every day, you test my patience. You should have realized by now that I'm not so easily trifled with." She pressed her back to the wall, fists clenched. "I'll never stop fighting," she said, voice trembling with anger. "I'd rather be free for a moment and suffer the consequences than live in a cage for the rest of my life." Cedric advanced until they were mere inches apart, his expression cold enough to freeze fire. For a moment, Sarah thought he might strike her or forcibly subdue her. Instead, he seized her wrists, twisting her arms behind her back, pressing his body close to hers so she couldn't move. She felt his breath near her ear, and her pulse hammered so hard she could barely think. "You are my property," he whispered icily. "Do not forget that." She shuddered, torn between rage and a strange thrill she refused to acknowledge. Something deep within her responded to his dominating presence, a dark spark that both terrified and excited her. She forced her voice to remain steady. "And if I don't want to be your property?" Cedric's grip tightened. "That's irrelevant. Now, you will learn obedience if I have to force it into you." The threat in his tone made her tense, and she stared at him, her heart wild in her chest. Slowly, he released her, stepping back with visible effort. She leaned against the wall, arms sore from the rough handling. He turned as if to leave but paused at the door. "I'm placing more guards outside," he said. "Try running again. And next time, you'll end up in a place far worse than this." With that, he departed, leaving her alone. She sank to the floor, breathing heavily, her mind a swirl of turmoil. His nearness had sparked a tumult of conflicting emotions. Part of her hated him with every fiber of her being for treating her as a possession. But another part, one she feared to acknowledge, had felt something resonate in that moment. As the days passed, Cedric carried out his threat of tightening security. 2 or 3 guards accompanied her whenever she was allowed outside for a short walk. She saw no chance for escape. She tried not to think about the strange swirl in her chest whenever Cedric was near. His cruelty still angered her, and yet she could not deny a deeply buried fascination. Sometimes he was gentler than she expected, as if fighting an internal battle of his own, only to revert to bitter coldness moments later. She overheard bits of hushed conversation among the pack about tensions with a rival group in the south. It seemed that war, or at least a violent conflict, might be brewing. One afternoon, Lucan escorted her through the corridors to let her outside. She noted that Lucan had a more sympathetic air than most. He addressed her politely, and though he was clearly loyal to Cedric above all, he showed moments of kindness. They reached the courtyard and she felt the sun on her face. With a sigh, she closed her eyes, savoring the warmth. Lucan stood a respectful distance away, arms folded, while 2 other guards kept watch. Just then, a faint voice tugged at the edge of her consciousness. Her eyes snapped open. She glanced around, seeing no one speaking. Yet the voice came again, a low, distant murmur, as though someone were calling her name from inside her own mind. She stumbled, pressing a hand to her temple. Lucan tensed, stepping forward. "Are you all right?" he asked. "What's wrong?" She shook her head, confused and disoriented. The voice whispered again, but the words were incoherent. She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling something stir in the depths of her chest. A sudden wave of dizziness made her drop to one knee. The guards rushed forward, weapons half drawn, unsure if she was playing a trick. Lucan knelt beside her. "Sarah," he said in an urgent tone. "Are you ill?" She fought to focus, shaking her head. I heard something." She trailed off, unable to explain. Before Lucan could question her further, Cedric strode onto the scene. His gaze swept over them, taking in Sarah's kneeling posture and Lucan's look of concern. In a few quick steps, Cedric was at her side, roughly lifting her by the arms. She winced but did not resist. "What is this about?" Cedric asked, voice tight with suspicion. Lucan stood looking uncertain. "She just collapsed," he said. "It might be exhaustion, or something else." Cedric studied her face, noticing the thin sheen of sweat on her brow, the confusion in her eyes. He wanted to shake her for answers, but something in him wavered. Instead, he signaled for the guards to return her to her room. That night, the voice in Sarah's mind grew stronger. She tossed restlessly on the cot, drifting in and out of anxious half-sleep. The voice was feminine, husky, and resonated like an echo through her bones. "You are not alone," it seemed to say. The next day, she mustered the courage to explore that strange phenomenon. Alone in her new chamber, she closed her eyes, concentrated on the presence she had felt. At first, she thought she was delusional. Then, ever so faintly, the voice spoke again. This time, a single, clear sentence formed. "You are like them, and yet different." Her eyes flew open, heart pounding. The words repeated in her head. Her mind churned with possibilities. She recalled the unusual strength she sometimes felt, the quick healing, the heightened senses. Fear mingled with a stirring sense of hope that she had never known. Could it be that she wasn't fully human? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had heard rumors in hushed corners about half-breeds, children of werewolves and humans, though many believed such a union was impossible or cursed. But if this voice was her wolf? Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic beat of her heart. Was there truly a wolf inside her? In the following days, as she struggled to understand her changing reality, a storm of trouble arrived. Scouts brought word of an imminent attack from the southern pack. Cedric mobilized his warriors, instructing everyone within the estate to prepare for battle. On a cold, windy evening, the enemy launched their assault. Sarah heard the howls echoing beyond the walls, shrieks of metal on metal, savage snarls that clawed at the night. The estate's outer defenses were battered. She was locked in her room, but the clangs and roars filtered through her window, and she felt her pulse race in fear. She paced back and forth, mind whirling with conflicting thoughts about whether to use the commotion to flee or hide. A deeper instinct told her she was in the eye of a gathering storm. Suddenly, the door burst open and Lucan stumbled in, bleeding from a gash on his arm. He was half-shifted, eyes glowing, and fangs elongating. "We're overrun," he rasped. "They managed to breach a section of the wall." "Get out of here!" Sarah stared at him, uncertain if this was a trick. Lucan shoved a key into her hand. "Go. Now," he insisted, then turned to limp back into the corridor. Sarah hesitated for only a second before darting after him. Flames crackled somewhere, and the air smelled of smoke and blood. She found herself in the middle of chaos. Wolves in partial or full shift tore into one another. Bodies littered the floors. Her heart thundered, and the voice in her mind rose in volume, stirring her blood. As she darted through the corridor, she nearly collided with Cedric himself. He was fully shifted into a towering black wolfman hybrid, eyes blazing. Blood matted his fur, but he moved with lethal precision. When he spotted her, a flash of recognition cut through his rage, but an enemy's lunge diverted his attention. She stood stunned as Cedric and a massive gray-furred opponent slammed into each other. The force of their collision shook the walls. Cedric snarled, driving the intruder back. Sarah could scarcely breathe. For a moment she wanted to flee, but the sight of Cedric, threatened and surrounded by savage shapes, made her stop. Why should she care? He had treated her as property, yet she couldn't ignore a tug in her chest, a feeling that she was connected to him in some unexplainable way. She looked down at her trembling hands. The voice inside her mind surged. "Shift. Let me out." She didn't know how. Panic and a bizarre excitement warred in her gut. Another enemy wolf raced around the corner, eyes locked on Cedric's back. Sarah clenched her fists. Without thinking, she rushed forward, grabbing a broken spear from the floor. She hurled herself at the charging wolf, burying the jagged tip into the beast's side. It yowled, stumbling. Before it could recover, she stabbed again, adrenaline spiking. Shock rippled through her that she had managed such a feat. Cedric, finishing off his own opponent, whirled around. He saw Sarah standing over a wounded intruder, panting heavily. Their gazes locked, and for a moment he looked astonished. Two more enemies burst in. Cedric sprang at one, tangling them in a deadly grapple. The other lunged for Sarah. Her instincts flared. She dodged, barely escaping its teeth. She fell backward, the creature snapping inches from her face. She kicked hard, but it held fast, claws scraping the floor. She braced herself, crying out. Then something inside her broke open like a dam. A feral roar tore from her throat. Heat raced through her limbs, her bones felt molten, and in a rush of agony and power, she partially shifted, her muscles bulging, nails turning into sharpened claws. She raked them across the wolf's muzzle, forcing it back. Cedric witnessed her transformation, eyes flaring wide with shock. She launched herself upward, ignoring the ripping pain in her muscles, and slashed her foe's chest. The beast yelped, staggering away in confusion. By the time the chaos subsided, the intruders who survived were in full retreat. Cedric's pack regrouped, battered but victorious. Fires were hastily quenched, hallways glistened with blood, and the moans of injured wolves echoed through the estate. Lucan organized a triage area with the help of Eveline, the healer. Cedric shifted back into his human form, covered in wounds that slowly knit together. But his focus was on Sarah. She stood in the corridor, half-shifted, her breath ragged, eyes wide in disbelief. Patches of fur clung to her arms. Her nails were elongated and her features had a feral cast. She stared at Cedric with a mixture of terror and wonder. "You're like us," Cedric said quietly, though it was clear she wasn't a full werewolf. She trembled, her body slowly reverting, hair matted with sweat. "I don't know what I am," she breathed. Then her legs buckled and Cedric caught her before she hit the ground. He could feel her heart hammering in her chest. Some of the assembled wolves looked on with a mixture of fascination and caution. A half-human, half-wolf was a rarity, sometimes considered taboo or cursed. But Cedric could not tear his gaze from her face. He cradled her gently, taking in every detail of her awakened nature. As he held her, a strange warmth spread through him, and for the first time since his Luna's death, he felt something crack inside the wall he had built around his heart. In the wake of the battle, Cedric carried Sarah to a more comfortable chamber, instructing Eveline to see to her wounds. Lucan left them in peace. After cleaning her up, Eveline bowed out. Sarah regained consciousness, blinking in confusion. The room was bright with daylight, revealing Cedric slouched in a chair beside the bed, exhaustion etched on his face. He turned to look at her, expression unreadable. She tried to sit up, wincing at a throb in her limbs. "You saved me out there," he said softly, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. She avoided his gaze. "I didn't do it for you," she lied, her tone weak. But even as she spoke, she remembered the moment she had chosen to leap into danger rather than escape. Conflicting emotions welled up in her. "You can't lie to me," Cedric said, a trace of his old arrogance returning. "I felt your fear, but I also saw your strength. You are something new, Sarah. Something you don't understand yet." She swallowed, tears pricking her eyes. "I never asked for this," she whispered. "I don't even know what I am, or how I ended up here." Cedric stood, pacing the room in agitation. "Then let me help you find out," he said. She laughed bitterly. "Why would I ever trust you? You've treated me like an animal, kept me locked up. I'm just your property, remember?" A flash of guilt crossed Cedric's face, soon replaced by frustration. "You don't understand," he began, but words failed him. He ran a hand through his hair. "I lost someone," he said at last, voice tight. "Someone I was meant to spend my life with. When I saw you at that auction, I acted on an impulse I can't explain. I thought it was just an echo of my grief. But maybe—" He trailed off, uncertain how to voice the strange bond he had started to sense between them. Sarah's eyes stung. She wanted to hate him, she wanted to remain defiant. But the memory of his arms lifting her to safety after the fight, the fierce concern in his eyes, left her conflicted. Slowly she said, "I don't forgive what you did, and I'm not sure I ever will. But I can't deny there's something going on. I hear this voice in my head, a wolf's voice calling me. Now I've discovered I can shift, at least partially." Cedric drew closer, eyes intent. "If you let me, I can teach you. I don't fully understand your hybrid nature, but my pack and we can help you discover it." She studied his face for a long time, searching for deceit. Though he appeared cold and guarded, she sensed no lie in him at that moment. "I'll stay," she said finally, "but not because I'm yours. I'm staying to find out who or what I really am." Cedric exhaled slowly, relief threading through the tension in his shoulders. He nodded once. "Fair enough." In the days that followed, a fragile truce settled between them. Cedric, still weighed by guilt for his earlier cruelty, offered Sarah small freedoms under the supervision of trusted pack members. She was allowed to walk the grounds without shackles, though guards discreetly watched her. He arranged for her to train with some of the younger wolves, learning basic combat skills and, more importantly, control over any flickers of her newfound abilities. At first she resisted, still bristling with resentment at the memory of his harsh treatment. Yet, as she sparred under the open sky with the pack warriors, she found a strange sense of belonging. They accepted her hesitantly, some out of respect for Cedric's orders, others out of genuine curiosity and sympathy. She discovered that her senses were sharpening each day, her strength edging closer to that of a full werewolf, though not quite matching it. Cedric watched her from a distance, arms folded, expression inscrutable, but she could feel his gaze lingering on her. At night, she sometimes dreamt of him, torn between fury and a slow-burning desire she refused to name. She woke more than once sweating, tangled in the sheets, the memory of his intense eyes haunting her. When they crossed paths, tension charged the air. He tried to keep his distance, but occasionally the warmth in his tone would slip through. She in turn tried to keep her guard up, yet she found herself drawn to glimpses of the man beneath the hardened Alpha King facade. One evening, as twilight bathed the courtyard, Sarah practiced the partial shift with Mira, the lead trainer, who barked instructions. Cedric stood by, silent. Sweat dripped down Sarah's temples, her body aching with the strain of forcing a half-transformation. She managed to let her claws and canines emerge, eyes glowing a pale silver, but holding that state took all her concentration. Suddenly, she faltered, losing her balance. Cedric appeared at her side, catching her arm before she fell. She gasped, looking up at him. Their eyes locked. His hand, warm and steady, gripped her forearm. In that moment, a current of tension sizzled between them. She did not pull away, and he did not let go. Mira cleared her throat awkwardly, taking a step back. Cedric's gaze lingered on Sarah's half-shifted form. He could sense the raw power simmering just under her skin, and a fierce protectiveness surged in him. This was no mere captive. She was something he was beginning to cherish, though he fought to keep that realization from unraveling him. At last, he released her gently, turning to Mira with a brief nod. Mira resumed the lesson, and Cedric watched, his chest tightening whenever Sarah stumbled or cried out in exertion. After training ended, Cedric offered Sarah a water skin. She took it, drinking greedily, her eyes never leaving his. "Thank you," she murmured, pressing her lips together afterward as if surprised by her own politeness. He only inclined his head. Without another word, he walked away, though she saw the turmoil in his posture, the tension that came from a man fighting emotions he did not want to feel. That night, Sarah wandered the corridors, unsettled by the swirling conflict in her heart. She knew Cedric was not a kind man. He had proven that repeatedly, dominating her from the moment he bought her. And yet something in him had changed since the night of the battle. She sensed remorse and vulnerability beneath his stern exterior. She also recognized that, in spite of everything, she felt drawn to him. The idea infuriated her, made her feel weak, but she could not deny it. She made her way to the library, a quiet chamber filled with old tomes and a single flickering lamp. The door creaked slightly, revealing Cedric inside, pacing between the shelves. He halted, turning in surprise at her appearance. They stood there, illuminated by the faint golden glow. "I didn't realize anyone else came here," she murmured. He shrugged, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "I don't sleep much," he said. "Sometimes I find it easier to wander." She nodded, not sure whether to approach or retreat. The silence stretched. Finally she spoke, voice subdued. "I want to know more about half-wolves, about my kind." Cedric studied her, then nodded toward a particular shelf. "I've read some older accounts," he said. "Not many. Half-wolves are rare, often hidden away, or—" He trailed off, letting her fill in the grim possibilities. She stepped closer, scanning the spines of ancient books. "Why would anyone hide them?" she asked. Cedric hesitated. "Some believe hybrids are unnatural. Others see them as potential threats, more unpredictable than full-blooded werewolves or pure humans. There have been stories of them wielding abilities that surpass normal wolves or failing to master any shift at all. It varies." They stood side by side, reading snippets from thick yellowed pages. She found references to ancient pacts that forbade any union between humans and wolves, tales of ostracized offspring, even savage hunts to exterminate those deemed unnatural. A cold chill passed over her. Cedric glanced at her from the corner of his eye. "You see why it's dangerous?" he said quietly. "If word spreads that you're a hybrid, some might want to destroy you." She closed the book, hugging it to her chest, eyes distant. "And what do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He pressed his lips together, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "At first I wanted to keep you under control, to break you if need be. Now, I can't deny I feel responsible for you. And beyond that..." He hesitated, exhaling a shaky breath. "I don't want to lose someone else." Her heart thudded. She recalled the night in the corridor, how he had risked everything in the battle, and how she had chosen to help him. Something unspoken passed between them. Slowly, she reached out and brushed her fingertips across the back of his hand. It was the gentlest of contacts, yet it made them both draw in a sharp breath. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers curled over hers. They stood that way for several heartbeats, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. Then, as if waking from a trance, Cedric let go, stepping back. "I don't deserve your trust," he said. "I've done terrible things. I've forced you to remain here, used fear to control you." She bit her lip, a swell of conflicting emotions roiling inside. Part of her wanted to rage against him for his cruelty, the humiliations he had inflicted, but another part sensed the sincerity of his remorse. "I can't just forget what you did," she said, "but maybe, in time, if you truly want to make amends..." Her voice trailed off. He caught her meaning, nodding. The faint flicker of hope in his eyes nearly undid her resolve. Between them, a complicated bond formed, teetering between resentment, guilt, desire, and a tentative mutual respect. Their arguments were fierce, fueled by unresolved anger and buried trauma, but their reconciliations were unexpectedly tender, filled with unspoken longing. Little by little, the fortress of ice around Cedric's heart began to thaw. He found himself drawn to Sarah's fierce independence, her refusal to cave to darkness even when she had every reason to do so. For Sarah, the lines of hatred she had once drawn so clearly blurred each time Cedric showed her small kindnesses or defended her against a prejudiced pack member. She remembered his cruelty too well to fully trust him, yet each shared moment of vulnerability chipped away at her defenses. Still, she wrestled with the guilt of feeling anything resembling affection for the man who once treated her as a mere possession.